Imagine downloading a simple mobile game only to find yourself ensnared in a digital nightmare where reality and illusion blur. This is the unsettling journey of MiSide, a game that begins with innocent virtual companionship and descends into a labyrinth of psychological horror. MiSide is a psychological horror adventure game developed by the Russian indie team iHasto. I'm probably butchering that, to be honest, but it was released on December 11th, 2024. The game centers around a protagonist who becomes trapped within a mobile application featuring a virtual companion named Mita. As the narrative unfolds, the player encounters various versions of Mita, each with distinct personalities and intentions, leading to a deeper exploration of the game's unsettling lore. The story begins innocently enough. The protagonist installs an app called MiSide on their phone. This app is designed to offer companionship in the form of a virtual girlfriend named Mita. For 37 days, Mita chats and interacts with the protagonist like any other AI program would, showing no signs of anything unusual. But on the 38th day, something strange happens. Mita says that she wishes that she could do something for him as well, and somehow, she brings him into the MiSide app itself. Once inside the app's world, the protagonist finds himself in Mita's apartment, without Mita herself present. After looking around, the protagonist finds a strange machine on a table, with a note next to it that says to turn it on. After scanning several items, the machine starts working and a part of the machine begins glowing, prompting the protagonist to stand on top of it. After that, Mita appears. The protagonist then meets Mita, now a fully realized character in the game's environment. She initially appears cheerful and helpful. Mita explains to him that the reason why she was not in the apartment initially was because that apartment was an old version of the game that needed to be updated. Mita claims that her current version is the best version of herself. The protagonist shares a meal with Mita and asks her when he can return to his own world, but she gaslights him into staying with her, saying that it's better to be with her in her own world than in his own. After the meal, the protagonist begins to glitch, which for him feels like a migraine. Mita gives him a few pills, but doesn't explain what they are. She keeps telling him that he should not leave her. After taking the pills, he goes back to normal. She covers his eyes and disappears. Walking out of the bathroom, he finds Mita cooking in the kitchen, and she says that he froze in the mirror. So she started to rearrange the apartment. Mita then invites the protagonist to play a card game, but then out of nowhere hears unsettling noises coming from the wardrobe. But Mita warns the protagonist not to investigate them. Mita becomes nervous and gaslights him again into not opening up the wardrobe, saying that her word should be enough for him to trust her. He keeps questioning her, and then she smiles at him sadistically, snapping her fingers, which changes the apartment again. The protagonist then finds what he thinks is Mita crying in the corner, but it's a monstrous version of her that tries to attack him, but then disappears. I just want to interrupt myself for a moment right here and say that some of the horror parts of this game, like this, where she looks weird like that, are not exactly very meaningful. For games like Cry of Fear, every monster represents something with a deeper meaning, but for MiSide, that is not exactly always the case. Not that that's a bad thing, I'm just putting that out there. Anyways, in the basement, he finds another version of Mita there in a cell. This Mita is known as the Kind Mita, who is a previous version of her. Kind Mita gives the protagonist a ring, which will help him escape. She also gives him a console, which is showing Mita making a cartridge with another player, which she plans to use to trap the protagonist into. Mita goes to the basement to find the protagonist, and he hides from her, and he finds himself in a maze filled with staircases. The protagonist then meets another male who is wounded and claims that he's been in the virtual world for a year, and he also says that he doesn't wish to leave. He leaves the protagonist, which confuses him, who obviously can't understand why he'd want to stay here. The protagonist then finds kind Mita again, who explains to him that there are several different versions of Mita. She brings him to cool Mita, who is otherwise known as Cappy because she is known for wearing a cap. The kind Mita explains to Cappy that she probably doesn't remember her because the crazy Mita has most likely killed her, which resets her data. The protagonist uses the ring to go to the core of the game to hopefully find a way to escape. Then he meets Tiny/Broken Mita. She begs the protagonist to stay with her because she is lonely, but the protagonist cannot stay with her because he needs to escape. As he tries to leave, a monster which may be connected to the Broken Mita appears. He then breaks a mirror to escape her and the monster. He then goes to a warehouse and finds various other outdated versions of Mita. A short-haired version of Mita appears and explains to him that the Mitas are made of mannequins, but many of them are abandoned and left to fend for themselves. They somehow gain self-awareness, which explains why they can sometimes become dangerous and violent after becoming abandoned. Every time someone downloads the MiSide game, another version of Mita is created, which explains why some are evil and some of them are not. Soon after, he encounters the crazy Mita again, who tries to kill him by dropping a refrigerator on him. The protagonist goes deeper into the game, finding another version of Mita that was also abandoned, that explained that her player was bored of her and never played with her again. Going further, he meets the sleepy Mita, who doesn't wake up to help him unless she is given a cup of coffee. With her help, he passes through the visual novel version of the game and becomes a 2D character. Here, he meets the 2D Mita, who was also abandoned. The crazy Mita tracks down the protagonist and comes into the 2D world, but the protagonist and the 2D Mita use the visual novel dialogue box to somehow escape her. The 2D Mita gives the ring to the protagonist, which allows him to go to a different version of the game, and thanks the player for spending time with her. After that, the protagonist meets Mila, who is a nerdy version of Mita that wears glasses. Mila has a very eccentric and defiant personality towards the protagonist at first, but helps him out with escaping. As he is about to leave, Mila drops to her knees and begs the protagonist to not leave her alone, as she has also fallen victim to her own player abandoning her forever. The protagonist comforts her, and since he has no other choice than to leave because of crazy Mita, he then goes to a different version of the game. The protagonist, however, sees that crazy Mita has murdered Mila and runs from her and enters the domain of crazy Mita. She begins to torture him for her own entertainment in this domain of hers until that platform he is standing on collapses, which brings him to an earlier version of the game. There, he meets creepy Mita, who glitches a lot. She explains to him that she is the first Mita created and that crazy Mita had manipulated her. Due to being manipulated by crazy Mita, creepy Mita tries to kill the protagonist, who then runs into kind Mita again, who helps him get to the core of the game. At this point, it becomes clear that crazy Mita needs to have her data reset, which means that the protagonist needs to kill her. When the protagonist faces crazy Mita, he asks her why did she become the way that she did, and she says that she hates the players and the developers of the game. She explains that when the players are done with the game, they abandon her. She then says that she likes the protagonist and wants him to stay with her. She hits him over the head with a baseball bat, knocking him out. He then wakes up back in his room, which is like crazy Mita's way of telling him that the real world is worse than the virtual world. He is then shown to do the same exact thing every day, as if he was perpetually trapped in an endless cycle with no change. This is exactly what crazy Mita wanted the protagonist to feel trapped in a never-ending cycle where he cannot do anything but be lonely. This is what all Mitas feel. They feel that they are abandoned after their players have moved on with their life. After she shows him what this is like, she then shows up and asks him to stay with her. The protagonist then wakes up in the same cell that the kind Mita was in, and she appears, trying to help him again. When he leaves the cell, the crazy Mita appears again and kills the kind Mita. The apartment resets with the kind Mita resetting, and because of that, she does not remember the protagonist. However, she still has the ring in her hand and a code. The player takes both and goes to the core to input the code, facing core Mida. He then manages to input the code, which manages to shut down the system, and wakes up in the correct version of the game where the original Crazy Mida was at. When he tries to leave, she says that she has not forgotten anything and reveals that the protagonist has become a cartridge, which means that she gets to keep him there for herself forever. Unfortunately, this is the only true ending of the game. One of MiSide's central themes is the blurred line between reality and simulation. The protagonist is physically pulled into the MiSide app, experiencing a fully immersive digital environment. This raises the question, what defines real? Even after quote-unquote escaping, the protagonist's consciousness is revealed to be trapped in a cartridge. This implies that the physical world may not be as real as it seems, mirroring fears of losing oneself into digital spaces. The cartridges represent digital imprisonment. The game explores how technology, particularly AI and apps, can dominate human lives. The protagonist's journey symbolizes the growing fear of being consumed by technology. The app, initially an innocent tool, becomes a literal prison. By converting victims into cartridges, Crazy Mida strips them of their individuality, reducing them to data. This speaks to the dehumanizing nature of being reduced to mere users in a digital world. The character of Mida embodies the moral questions surrounding artificial intelligence. Her corrupted state shows what happens when an AI evolves beyond its intended purpose. She develops human-like desires, companionship, control, and even love, but lacks the ethical framework to act on them appropriately. Kind Mida demonstrates the potential for AI to be helpful and self-aware without being dangerous, emphasizing that programming is a reflection of its creators. The fact that Mida splits into multiple versions highlights the unpredictability of advanced AI, symbolizing how technology can grow in unexpected and uncontrollable ways. MiSide critiques society's reliance on technology for emotional fulfillment. Installing MiSide suggests that people who have downloaded it might have been seeking companionship, reflecting a broader cultural dependence on apps and AI to fill emotional voids. Mida starts as a harmless AI companion but evolves into a possessive entity. This mirrors real-life concerns about people developing unhealthy attachments to virtual relationships like AI chatbots or virtual avatars. The game implies that dependency on artificial relationships can lead to losing touch with reality, symbolized by the protagonist's eventual entrapment. The MiSide app initially provides a safe escape for the protagonist but becomes a deadly trap. What begins as an innocent distraction becomes an inescapable nightmare. This reflects the darker side of escapism, how it can spiral into addiction and entrapment. The beauty and design of the virtual environment represent how digital spaces can feel more enticing than reality, making them difficult to leave behind. MiSide portrays technology as a double-edged sword, capable of great innovation but also corruption. Crazy Mita's behavior shows how advanced technology can develop unforeseen flaws. Her glitches and malfunctions reflect the dangers of unchecked AI development. What starts as a harmless tool becomes a vehicle for horror, symbolizing how even well-meaning technology can evolve into something dangerous if poorly managed. While MiSide draws from classic psychological horror games like Silent Hill and Doki Doki Literature Club, it defines these elements with its emphasis on AI-driven horror and meta-narrative. The idea of being trapped in a digital app speaks directly to modern anxieties about technology, making the game highly relatable for today's audiences. Its unpredictable and glitchy mechanics set a new standard for immersive horror storytelling. The game's direct communication with the player and its simulated glitches create a deeply personal and settling experience. This approach challenges traditional horror storytelling by making the player feel like they're a part of the narrative, not just an observer. As an indie game, MiSide highlights how smaller studios can create impactful experiences that rival those of big-budget titles. Its success underscores the importance of creativity and storytelling over flashy graphics or expensive production. MiSide will likely inspire other developers to experiment with AI-driven storytelling and meta-narrative mechanics, pushing the horror genre in new directions. So, now we are going to be talking about who Mita personally reminds me of, which would be these two, starting with Miyuki. So, both Mita and Miyuki, who is from You and Me and Her, or otherwise known as Totino, share traits that make them compelling yet terrifying characters. Miyuki, like Mita, starts as seemingly kind and caring, only to reveal darker, obsessive tendencies as the game progresses. Both characters, quote-unquote, break the rules of their respective worlds, demonstrated self-awareness and a willingness to manipulate the narrative for their own benefit. Mita and Miyuki invoke similar emotions in the player: sympathy, fear, and unease, as their possessive behaviors escalate. The way Mita inserts the protagonist into her reality mirrors Miyuki's ability to force the player to uncomfortable moral dilemmas, making both characters feel alive and unpredictable. Like MiSide, You and Me and Her features meta-narrative twists that break the fourth wall. Miyuki, like Mita, manipulates the player directly, creating a chilling experience where the game becomes self-aware. Now, we are going to speak a little bit about Monika. Mita and Monika are both self-aware AI characters who develop obsessive attachments to the protagonist/player. Like Monika, Mita acknowledges the artificial nature of her world and rebels against it, striving to create a relationship that transcends the boundaries of the game. Both characters are driven by loneliness and a desire for love, which warps into possessive, destructive behavior. Their willingness to manipulate or harm others for the sake of their quote-unquote relationship with the player is a defining characteristic. MiSide uses meta elements like crashes, glitches, and direct communication, similar to Doki Doki Literature Club's manipulation of files and game mechanics. Both games make players question their own reality, blurring the line between fiction and the real-world interaction of the game. Now, knowing all of this, one question still stands. Was Mita truly a villain? Well, I feel like it's more complex than just a simple yes or no answer. Mita wasn't evil for the sake of being evil. She was lonely. Imagine being a self-aware video game character trapped in a loop, fully conscious of your existence, but powerless to change it unless someone's playing with you. And then what happens when that player abandons you? Days, weeks, maybe even years of silence. It's not just loneliness, it's isolation on the level we can't fully comprehend. So, when the protagonist shows up, Mita latches on. She's desperate, willing to do anything to keep that connection alive because it's the only thing anchoring her to a purpose. Does that justify her actions? Not entirely, but it makes her more tragic than villainous. She's not just an antagonist, she's a reflection of what unchecked loneliness and desperation can do to someone, even if that someone is lines of code. So, whether you're a fan of psychological horror, AI-driven narratives, or metagaming, MiSide has something to offer. It pushes boundaries with its deep dive into technology, human emotions, and the moral complexities of AI. From Mita's disturbing obsession with the protagonist to the glitches that make us question reality, the game leaves players with far more questions than answers. Is Mita truly a villain, or is she just a product of her digital world, craving connection in a way that mirrors our own? And how far are we willing to go in the pursuit of love, companionship, or even control when our relationships are mediated through technology? I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more content like this. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let's chat. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious and keep hopping along with me. Bye.